on a Facebook channel, and it's my great pleasure once again to be sharing my modest expertise in the field of teaching ESP, and in my case legal English. And topic of today's talk and webinar, and I will do my best in order to give some kind of more practical information and less theory. It's related to how to create authenticity and in legal English classes, of course in our ESP classes, because I mostly teach, as you see, as it already has been mentioned by Lucina, different universities, and at the same time I occupy the position of chief advisor at the Constitutional Court of Georgia. We are mostly organize summer schools, international also visits, and with this kind of admin work somehow helps me to kind of like build into a variety into my teaching experience related to legal English. Apart from the fact that I also teach business communication, philosophy of language, and same time business, and also so different kind of ESP subject. But legal English is one of the most challenging kind of subject, which I definitely started to enjoy after I decided to go beyond textbook and at the same time integrate authentic materials. Okay, so let's get started. And once again, so let me show kind of small contents of today's talk. First of all, I would like to once again highlight the importance of using authentic materials, in my case news articles. At the same time, I'm going to kind of show what challenges do we encounter when using news articles, especially in legal English context, because it's a kind of quite sometimes of issue which needs to quite given some particular care and attention. At the same time, I'm going to show you how to select news articles from different law legal sources, and how to structure or plan and how to design our own classes based on authentic materials and by using news articles. And I'm going to give you some kind of recommendations based on my experience, because as I mentioned, I have been giving legal English classes since 2008, since I joined Constitutional Court of Georgia, and I have been also participant over the international summer schools, and also I have been teaching legal English to University of Würzburg. At the same time, I also co-organize joint summer schools for Würzburg University and Robakice University. I gave some kind of workshops, and so around the topic of different topics of different concepts like freedom of speech, expression, etc., etc. Okay, so now once again, let's kind of recall why is it important to build authenticity in our classes, and in general, what is authenticity? And once again, we should always remember this is a kind of question, and which is related to the qualities bestowed on a text by the receiver of the information, and that is not even seen as something inherent as a text, but it's imparted and it's by the reader or listener. So this is a kind of one of the definitions, one of the most popular definitions of authenticity. When we talk about integration of authentic materials in general in ESP classrooms, once again, we should recall and we should remember that this is one of the challenging tasks, but of course, this task definitely boosts learners' interest around search topics, and at the same time, it motivates them to better learn the topic in ESP, in our case, legal English. As once again, materials which are derived from real life experience should be using and should be reflecting real language, and finally contributing to an effective learning process. And we as ESP teachers, in my case, me as legal English teacher, we are definitely kind of attracted to a large amount of materials or resources nowadays, which exist beyond textbooks. And at the same time, it's quite effective in order to develop most effective strategies in order to effectively integrate authentic materials in our classes. Once again, we are teachers of ESP. We are naturally attracted to authentic materials, and these authentic materials in our cases can be versatile, starting from, of course, news articles, TED Talks, recordings, some kind of stand-up comedy programs even. And firstly, the fact that you find something which is designed for a native speaker, and when you develop strategy to deal with real-life situation, this can be a very effective way of understanding proper understanding and have around the subject content matter, and at the same time, this can be quite motivating for learners and at the same time for instructors. And when we, of course, use unadapted materials, these materials help us all to lead our class to real life language application and make the ESP learning process more meaningful once again. But nowadays, of course, availability of authentic materials is both challenging and beneficial for ESP learners and teachers, because sometimes it should be meeting the expectations of our legal English learners. And of course, nowadays we know that for legal communication, it's very important to once again boost and develop analytical and research skills. And at the same time, analytical and research skills, of course, this can be given by reading tasks and developed, but at the same time, it's very important for legal professionals to equally develop their productive skills, such as speaking and such as at the same time writing. Yes, and when we talk about authentic materials in technology-based ESP classroom and legal English classroom, is definitely so boost learner autonomy and of course constructive learning process in tandem with raising media literacy. And as we see nowadays, there is a great variety of authentic materials in it, so in general. But in our case, I mostly use news articles, at the same time some kind of so of course some multimedia resources, such as some even so shows, some kind of programs which can be very, or like a news so programs which can be very effectively integrated into legal English class in our case. Okay, so and when we talk about so again, my preference of using newspaper articles, in my case, legal English class, what is the main reason? First of all, newspapers can be quite current, and at the same time, they, especially if we take like a newspaper like Guardian, it has a very nice law section from which we can definitely so get our students updated about recent judgments, so recent decision by different types of courts, judiciary, so branches of the government. At the same time, much information in newspapers definitely can serve as an excellent springboard, yeah, for our so legal English lessons. And of course, vector versatility is much more so of course important, because nowadays we can search lots of sources, lots of different kind of even briefs when we want to integrate, especially newspaper article in our legal English classroom. And of course, on one and whole, they all increase topical stories, kind of like media literacy, which is very important nowadays in the 21st century, and especially in these times. But well, of course, if for example, in my legal English class experience, so when I started to kind of like go beyond course book, and when I, of course, after consulting so some more experienced colleagues, for example, I was taking internship at the University of Vienna, and I was co-hosted by a professor of by a professor who was teaching mostly so legal English, and of course I will never remember so her advice that so we can never repeat one and the same for example legal English class, and of course we should definitely change and build variety. Yes, because brief and for the judgment, which was actually very of great actual importance for one, for example, maybe 1 year ago, this may be quite outdated now. That's why it's very important to touch upon the issue, which is a kind of applicable to current interest, to very big current political state, and that's why it's very time consuming for teachers, yes, to select a kind of so material which is very applicable at this and at the same time. And sometimes this authentic material may not be necessarily interesting for our learners and for our audience. But first challenge, which is definitely encountered when we actually plan our classes with authentic materials, in our case, newspaper articles, this is related to how the how text is organized. And because we know that it's very important to kind of like raise students' awareness around so some kind of very peculiar structure of the news article in order to so simplify this process of understanding. Another challenge, which is also related also when picking up newspaper articles, this is related to headlines, because sometimes some headlines, especially if we go beyond, for example, law sections, they can be maybe containing some puns, some stylistical devices, which can be quite difficult for our learners to decipher. That's why it's very important to kind of get students adapted to deciphering these headlines, maybe from general English classes, and when they of course encounter so similar headlines in ESP classes, this can be easier and less time consuming for us. So we can actually definitely save our time at later stage. For example, if you look at this article, it's a kind of like a headline from one of my favorite articles, which I have been very successfully using when teaching concepts of freedom of speech and expression. This is a kind of article from Guardian, and this is a case about famous stand-up comedian and whose husband sued her for defamation of a provocative show. As we see from this very simple headline, yes, at a first glance, glimpse, there are quite few keywords which can be not very easy for example, non-legal laypersons, yes, not legal professionals to decipher from the very first glance. At the same time, we should also teach our students that, of course, they can predict, they can actually focus potential content of the possible story through reading, second paragraph of the article. And as we see, once again, subheadline once again shows us that free speech means everything to me. So this actually gives us more information that this topic is going to be about freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And if we go beyond another, like a first paragraph, as we see, it says that Louis Rey says that she faced bankruptcy, so which, if she loses case, that could boil down judge's sense of humor. So as we see nowadays, now from this headline and sub-headline, students can predict lots of information, lots of content. So this can be very nice idea for us to kind of generate interest and make students kind of like at the same time build curiosity, yes, around the topic which we are going to actually present, practice, and produce in one, so ideally 90-minute lesson stage. Okay, and another difficulty which is also related to the fact that when we actually integrate authentic materials, in our case news articles, some difficulty can be related to specific genre. But of course, students need some help in order to understand features of this special genre. For example, headlines sometimes can be confusing, but of course there is a headline, a subheadline, which I already gave to you, which makes things clearer, yeah? And this can be sometimes a good summary of the story. And in this case, I often use 5 WH questions. So we call it journalist question, and students can be asked in order to try to find 5 WH questions from the subheadline. And at the same time, this will lead them to kind of build interest into the story. And so at the same time, it develops the critical thinking skills and analytical skills, which is very important for legal professionals. And suggested activity for this stage, which I'm going to show you. This is, for example, if we are going to work with news articles, students need some training once again, but as we see, this is a kind of suggested activity. So as you see, students were giving headline, then they were kindly asked to kind of summarize the story by using subheadlines. And as we see, an award-winning stand-up comedian is being sued by her estranged husband for allegedly defaming him in her show. Yes, we see a kind of at least 4 journalist question: who, what, where, why, not maybe when, not. It's not clear from this subhead line. This can be very easily answered by our students. Yes. So this is one of the suggested activity which I do during pre-reading stage. Again, now let's move to a kind of so another challenge which is related to difficulty of deciphering references. Yes, especially when we encounter so a kind of like a real life situation. And of course, we know that newspaper mostly give information about not about fictional characters, but they give information about existing personalities. Sometimes it's very kind of maybe so confusing for students to go beyond this so reference words. For example, free speech means everything to me. Yes, to whom, me, where does it stand for? Who does it stand for? Yes, that's why another, for example, is being sued by her estranged husband for defaming him. So there are some kind of differences which sometimes might confuse students, but of course this can be very successfully resolved when reading so the article itself, and this can definitely so diffuse the tension of not understanding this especially this referencing words. Another challenge is a kind of related to the using idioms, even in quite not only like so legal English articles, there are some idioms, and even in this so article, for example, I even underlined idioms: to beef up, be built as something, out of one's ear, boil down something. But so this can be turned into a very effective activity, and students can be asked to try and rewrite the article without any idioms, put the original idioms in a list, and sometimes so when students so read the text for details, especially during scanning stage, they could swap the role and try to actually get the meaning of this idioms. Yes, this can be very effective activity. And challenge number 5 is related to selection process. And why is it quite challenging? First of all, as I have mentioned, because nowadays we definitely come across with a variety of articles, and even one is the same topic can be kind of like can be even written by different authors from different perspectives, from different biases. That's why it's very important for instructor to actually integrate less biased, yes, opinion, and help students to differentiate fact from opinion. But at the same time, when thinking about which article can be most unbiased, at the same time we should take care about how interesting this article can be students, even the topic of freedom of speech. And I will never forget my example of giving the concept and teaching the students of teaching them the topic of consent to the students from Russia. And I really wanted to kind of like make this activity quite interactive. But when I touch upon the issue of freedom of speech and expression, I felt that Russian students were not very comfortable. Yes, so that's why it's very important when we talk about certain legal concepts. It's very important for us to be quite careful, but at the same time, it's very important to make our just voices heard loudly because this is a kind of universal value. And of course, we as democratic citizens of the 21st century, we should not avoid talking about such kind of issues. So this was one of my successful experiences of making students who were reluctant to talk about these issues because of the fact that they were simply so participants of this summer school. Again, it's very important for us to take care about length of the article. It should not be too long, and it should not be too kind of very just small. I'm going to put in the chat this article, which I already use. It's from the end. You will see that it's not very long, but of course, we should not adapt it. But at the same time, it's very important to take care about this from the very beginning process of selection of the article. So language issues should be very, of course, very much taken care of. And why? It's very important that these articles should kind of give a kind of potential for production stage, for discussions, for role plays, etc. And of course, it's very important for legal English class. It should have enough and sufficient vocabulary to be presented at practice during the lesson. So this is, of course, very important that it should have generative potential. And when we talk about different lesson stages, of course, once again, I'm not going to repeat what all the stages serve, which purposes are served, but still it's in ideal news lesson, we should cover all 6 lesson stages, starting from the warm-up activity, pre-reading, reading activity itself, application, follow-up activity, feedback correction, and homework activity. So, and I'm going to now once again show you so my recent experience of conducting legal English classes with a colleague of mine from US Embassy, Brandon. Maybe he's attending today's webinar because I remember that I shared a link with him. And together with Brandon, I am co-teaching different legal concepts. For example, one of the concepts which I have been actually teaching with Brandon, this is so about the case when President Biden signed this kind of bill in order to upgrade America's infrastructure into law. And believe me, this topic was actually mostly promoted with the Dogon News. It's a kind of very good resource, which also includes listening activity, listen to the article, so students can be also practicing their reading skill together with their listening skills. Both receptive skills are practiced in one the same lesson stage. And I really advise, because this resource was offered by fellow teacher from US Embassy, and I really just enjoyed doing it with my students. So because apart from a kind of only reading articles, students also were very much interested in listening the article, also watching some video around this topic, and etc. So as you see, so this is a kind of my modest experience of kind of integrating so different kind of resources, or at the same time, of course, based on authentic materials into legal English class. Now, of course, one of very important, of course, topic which I actually also tried to integrate as a legal English kind of topic. This was a topic of, again, freedom of expression and kind of right of expressing ourselves. And I kind of found a very interesting article from Guardian again, and this was a story which was actually related to the fact that in China, of course, maybe we may be aware of the fact that freedom of speech is a kind of a little bit, it undergoes a little bit of censorship. And a hero who told the truth that, so this was a doctor, he was warning the society that this is a deadly and fatal virus, but because of the fact that Chinese authorities did not want somehow to make his voice to be heard, that's why, so because of the fact that there is a certain kind of limitation of freedom of expression, so this doctor himself, he died of this COVID-19, and of course we all witness how many victims COVID actually brought to us. So this means once again that I really used this article very successfully with the students, and they really enjoyed. Once again, the topic was quite interesting. At the same time, it was very time relevant. And once again, I built all the activities starting from the presenting the article, presenting the vocabulary, at the same time discussion and different kinds of activities based around this article. Okay, and now let's return to one of my most frequently used article, because I am mostly kind of like love selecting the article which are a kind of neutral, not politically so very much maybe subject to debates, and that's why the case of the stand-up committing is a kind of a case which was very quite neutral for me. And as I shared already with you in the chat, I designed the following activities for this very interesting article. So first of all, once again, let me remind you that, of course, the aim of the warm-up activity is to generate kind of interest around the topic, and at the same time raise awareness around the topic and kind of activate schemata. Yes, we have to activate pre-existing knowledge. And these are the following activities for warm-up stage, and I mostly used in this class warm-up questions. So if you look at this question, and I would like to share the video, it's a very small video. Okay. What does this video show? First of all, this video showed, and I started to ask this question: what can they predict from this very just advertisement, TV commercial? That and they like generated kind of different kind of maybe maybe answers at the same time. Some students were quite creative, some maybe less creative, and actually they were very simply asked the question: who do you think is this person? Yes, okay. And so as we see from this very commercial, so this is a kind of promotion of the stand-up comedy show. Maybe students actually, as a result of this advertisement, they were given some information that Louis Ray is a quite more than a quite very famous comedian, especially in the UK. And so today in today's article, so then I gave them some quotes, yes, the warm-up activities, and these are quotes from for example from George Orwell, and students were asked based on this quote. So what do you think? What is the potential topic of today's lesson? Yeah, if liberty means anything at all, it means that the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. So again, this was a quote which I gave to students as a warm-up activity. And of course, I also gave them a kind of symbolic picture and asking them, what does this couple simply symbolize? And of course, students gave me different answers. So they don't have right to speak, they don't have right to express themselves, etc., etc. And again, another alternative for more warm-up activities, this can be, students can be given a very famous quote by Erasmus, yes, and in a free state, task should be also free. And how do they understand this quote? And again, so these quotes and these warm-up questions gave them a kind of quite generative interest, yes, generative interest around the topic of today's lesson. So this is actually the second stage of the lesson, pre-reading. And of course, once again, let me remind you that in general circumstances, lesson proper should always begin with pre-reading or listening activities, but unlike warm-up activities, these activities already are directly related to the text, and they serve the purpose of provoking interest around the student, at the same time building confidence and preparing the students for the task ahead. And in this stage, it's quite common for instructors to carefully pre-teach the vocabulary. And I'm sure you as like maybe not legal English teachers, but as ESP teachers, you definitely pre-teach vocabulary at this stage. But of course, it's very important that we as teachers, we should ensure ourselves that this vocabulary will be recycled in the application or production stage. Again, I'm going to suggest some of these activities for this stage. These are synonym matching. Yes, for example, students can be asked to match the words or synonyms which are taken from the article. And again, students can be given fill in the blank activity, vocabulary speculation, vocabulary selection, sentence selection, true and false, and another very nice activity which can be also done. This is speculation of the story. Students can be asked to predict the story from the headline or article's picture around the article. Yes, this is what I have done and designed. And for example, students were given this, first of all, this headline, which I already gave to you, and they were kindly asked, what do they think the article is going to be about? And believe me, this really generated huge interest, and I all the time have been receiving lots of interesting ideas and even more creative ideas from students than even from myself. That's why after these students are given, once again, sub headline and quote, yes, and this kind of enables us instructors to speculate more about the story, and once again So kind of like get students engaged before actually so giving them ready-made article, yeah. And another activity, it's related once again during this stage. This is once again working on them pre-teaching vocabulary. And students are kindly asked, let's brainstorm vocabulary so related to the topic of freedom of expression. And of course, believe me, students definitely gave me interesting ideas. Maybe not exactly the same. For example, libeling, so defamation, of course, this can be new words, but some kind of words, this can be very naturally so predicted by students. And students after this can be given already ready-made words from the articles, and they are kindly asked to think, pair, and share in a peer work. Yeah, and these are actually, can you see, almost almost 9 words from this article, starting from the libel, surveillance, strange husband, like a not divorced one, SUFO, abusive, allegation, claimant, read, defamation, and students were given together with these words, so definitions on the separate page, and they were kindly asked to do it first individually, then think and pair with their partners. So this is one of the activity which really worked well in the case of so legal English class, and not only legal English class, but in the case of like a famous comedian's case. After this task, of course, we mostly did our best in order to kind of we succeeded in teaching vocabulary. Now it's a high time to get started. Yes, it's a high time to start reading, and this can be done by when we especially use these multimedia resources by listening article. This is very good and very effective, but of course, students can be also given the article which I already shared in the chat. And reading tasks definitely build reading skills from general comprehension questions to specific like details. Yes, and as we see, we can definitely use different types of reading strategies like skimming from general idea, and again scanning. Skimming is when we ask students to quickly read the article, and scanning when we definitely get students engaged in looking for the specific information. And in this case, we can definitely ask detailed comprehension questions. For example, which paragraph says, what do these people actually refer to? What do they think? Find a word which means, find today's vocabulary, how was this vocabulary used, etc., etc. So once again, general comprehension question can be very effectively used for checking pre-reading ideas. At the same time, this can be definitely done during skimming and scanning stage, and then we can very smoothly and gradually and logically transit to detailed comprehension questions together with our learners. And when we talk about, once again, scanning stage or reading for details, here we can actually help our students to identify the references which they might not be able to identify at the very beginning of the talk. Yes, do you remember? For example, free speech means everything to me. From the subhead line, so the me may not be very kind of clear, but after reading the text, after scanning, students can find the words and people who stand behind these referencing words. Yes, this is very important for us. For them, their ear means lawyers, yes, or solicitors. That's why it's very important for students to kind of get more information after every successive reading. Another activity, this underlying idioms, and again, asking students think, pair, and share, and at the same time, maybe try to actually give a already meaning of the idioms after scanning the articles, because they already know and they no longer need to predict the meaning of the idiom. Yes. Another activity which can be also done during scanning stage is the kind of which paragraph touches the issue of free speech. And for example, what do this number 50, 2015, 2000, etc. refer to? And believe me, students will be very much engaged in going into details and read the article for more detailed information. And at the same time, if we ask the students, what do Mark Stevens, libel lawyer, Beaumont, Louis Rey, and Louis Rey is the stage name for Beaumont, and Taylor Hampton, solicitor for Tamari, say. What do they say? They will go to the text after scanning it, and they will answer these questions based on scanning. And at the same time, students can be asked, find the phrase which means to support, to advertise, to describe, or separate it, etc. And again, students can be, of course, given all these numbers, and we can check their understanding after the second reading or after scanning stage. So these are actually all the activities which we do during scheming and scanning stage, more or less. And now it comes very so kind of high time in order to move to application stage. But what is the role of the application or follow-up stage and task? Once again, whatever the focus of the lesson, an effective news lesson, it should definitely extend beyond the article, especially if it, so when we talk about legal English, because it's a time, it's an opportunity for us teacher to boost students' analytical skills. At the same time, we can learn lots of interesting ideas and discussions from our students, and students need to have a chance to use kind of new vocabulary and knowledge in a meaningful and less controlled way. So this is a kind of less guided stage, and students should be reminded to use new vocabulary and target language during this stage as much as possible. So this is very important. And when we talk about suggested activity for this stage in a kind of legal English class, in almost legal English class, I can't avoid not doing role play activity. Of course, discussion can be less than so maybe it needs less preparation, but it's very effective again. And of course, debates are one of the best kind of activities which can be very much effectively so boosting their productive skills together. They're like maybe analytical thinking and research skills. And during discussion time, for example, I very often ask students such kind of very simple question. Do you agree or disagree, for example, with the following statement? What are the statements? The case of student performance is threat to the art, as comedians say, yeah? And second statement or quote, the case would be a test of whether British judges can take a joke. So whether British judges still have a good sense of humor. So, and these statements are definitely answered by two groups of students. And in this case, the students are kind of like divided into two groups, and comedians and maybe like judges. And are comedians, justices, libel lawyers, and solicitors. As you see, so this statement, the case of the suit performer, is answered by all of these four groups of the students, because I am dividing them according to four categories. And again, the same statement too is also answered from different perspectives, from comedians' perspectives, justices, libel lawyers, solicitors. And believe me, you will receive cascade of opinions and lots of information and lots of kind of maybe confrontational, a little bit controversial opinion. So this is what I enjoy when kind of including such kind of so critical thinking task based on role plays, based on like so debates and discussions. And one of the debate questions, which can be very, for example, successfully used, and which I definitely did with my students, is what would you do? What would you have done in your shoes, in Louis Rey's shoes? In her case, and what she did, yes, because she actually defamed. So she was actually kind of joking, yes, about her French husband in her show, and she thinks it's okay, but let's ask her husband's solicitor. So this is a kind of like insulting, yes, it's a kind of violation of the data privacy. So we can receive lots of ideas, lots of kind of comments, lots of interesting, definitely. So opinions. And what do you think of what he did? Like here he goes to Louis Rey's husband. And what do you think of what comedians did? So do you know what comedians did? Maybe you will see and go beyond and read this article. They actually launched fundraising campaign for Louis Rey, and she definitely so actually collected enough money in order to actually brings the case into the court. And after this activity, so we actually, we can very easily move to another lesson stage, which is definitely feedback and correction stage. And of course, we should all the time remember that feedback and corrections, these are the case stages, so stage, which we actually don't give too much maybe time, but at least 5 minutes of every lesson should be reserved for this stage, because together with our warm-up stage, feedback and correction stage, they kind of serve as the bookends of news lesson, and they at the same time cool down, they serve as a cooler activity, and at the same time it enables us and students as well to reflect upon what they have learned, what is the actual takeaway from this lesson. At the same time, this stage also guarantees that students leave the classroom with a sense of achievement and the sense of like accomplishment. This is very important. And during this stage, so I designed this activity. I actually prepared some kind of quotes, again, phrases from the sentence, and I asked the students to complete the phrases, maybe in chorus, maybe like in a group work. But for the first quote, hard mode was built as a provocative show which explores the kind of censorship, and students have to finish based on the text, based on the quotes and information and vocabulary, which was definitely used in a state for inflammatory statements. Yes, so I'm sure that students will be definitely succeeding, and because they will definitely just spend lots of time on this article, but this should be done in one lesson. And another stage, which is also very important during feedback, correction, at the same time feedback and motivation. And as you see, I mostly love doing revision, because I think that revision is a very good idea to briefly review together with students what was covered. And of course, sometimes we can review vocabulary or the article itself, and it's the best kind of strategy to elicit the information. Okay, and at the same time, this will not only reinforce the information, but it will satisfy the teacher that the student understands what was covered during the lesson. And homework is the last stage, and of course, we should not be definitely missed and left without attention. And this is a stage which is quite important for students in order to kind of get ahead, progress in their studies. Most students have little access to English outside the classroom. But nowadays it's not quite, but of course, nowadays we have exposure to English, but still setting homework definitely will encourage students to self-study material. At the same time, kind of like maybe not force, but a kind of like maybe motivate them to revisit the lesson once again. And this will definitely build the kind of like a very nice opportunity to retain the material, so which was actually offered during the classroom. And some suggested activities for the homework stage are the following. First of all, this can be research projects. Yes, and of course nowadays we are all attracted to project-based learning, and believe me, project-based learning is a kind of very necessary activity, especially not only in ESP classroom, not only in legal English classroom, in all types of general English classroom as well. At the same time, research project especially gives us opportunity to kind of enable students to revisit different sources, to read, get acquainted from different authors' opinion. There may be even biases, maybe even they're like some kind of different prospects around the same topic, and somehow compare and kind of like maybe deliver the product, yes, of their research, which is very much can be very effectively achieved as a result of newspaper articles. Again, one of my kind of very frequently used activities for this stage is this comparison activity. And in case I ask my students to read around the same topic from different sources, and believe me, when I was integrating this topic with my legal English students, and during like lots of summer schools, there were lots of articles around this topic. until actually Louis won this case, yes. But they then actually found this information, they compared this with so real news, and they kind of at the same time maybe wrote a kind of their own contribution in relation to this topic. Another activity, homework activity, it's kind of letter writing, and which I also did, and I'm going to show you this activity. This is a kind of activity where students were kindly asked to write a letter to someone from the article, telling them how they feel, yes, towards this character. Another activities, this can be summarizing the story, summarizing the content, summarizing main takeaway, yes, and at the same time listening to the different news, different programs, different kinds of reports around this maybe quite actual important case. And I'm going to go now together with you to the social networking site, which are very effectively used in order to ask students design a homework and prepare a letter to Louis Rey. And at the same time, they even helped me to collect enough money, fundraising activity. And when this case was before this case was brought into court. Let me go to the site and let me share. Do you see the screen? Let me share once again the site. This is a kind of Facebook page, you see, a GoFundMe, and fundraiser is no longer accepting donation because she was targeting to a kind of accumulate almost the 10,000 pounds, yeah, and believe me, everyone donated to her. And Louis Rey, because of her popularity, because of her kind of like high reputation, she was supported maybe by her the audience member, by her viewers, because nowadays you know that we are somehow very much fond of or protecting our right of freedom of speech and expression. And believe me, lots of people supported, and she collected enough money in order to hire to solicitor. At the same time, she won this case, yes. And as you see, based on this page, my students were kindly asked to write a letter to supporting Louis Rey, and they did it very successfully, and it really worked well. So comedian being sued, free speech, this was a kind of GoFundMe page, which definitely and actually existed around Louis Rey's famous comedian's case. Okay, let me return to the slides again. Okay, so and as we see, students also read information, and they wrote a letter, a kind of comment supporting and expressing at the same time their concern, their feelings. Even, can you believe, some students even wrote that they were actually supporting her husband, yeah, because especially male students, because no one wants a kind of to be defamed, verbally insulted in no one's show. But somehow this was a kind of like a case when somehow majority of my students, they were really just morally supporting comedian, because they think that our right, our right to freely expressing ourselves, this should be guaranteed and protected and respected. And I think this was like a voice of young generation, young people, and this really worked well. Another activity which was also offered by me, this was comparison activity, and my students were kindly asked, for them I'm telling, to read the articles and taken around from different sources and compare from different sources, how different sources deal with the same news. And here definitely we really saw lots of discussions, lots of interesting ideas about this topic, because students really enjoyed this topic. And as you see, this is a kind of like after 1 year, especially when all students were interested how all these kind of developments ended. So they were kind of asked to go to this article. And as you see from the headline, award-winning comic Louis Rey settled lawsuit over using personal material in her show. So as we see, almost around in 1 year's time, this case actually was resolved, and students were kind of intrigued, and once again they kindly asked to predict how this dispute was resolved, and at the same time who won. And believe me, this generated lots of different discussion, lots of different feedback from students, but they were all interested to see that Louis Rey was the winner of this case. And I really would like to conclude today that this was a I think, very small example of my own experience of designing legal English classes based on authentic materials, based on news articles in my case. But once again, so we and I really just want to kind of assure you that news articles can be definitely great teaching resource in the legal English classroom if they are structured well and if they have a meaningful kind of a purpose. And teachers, at the same time, we as legal English instructors, we can choose our own articles from newspapers, which we prefer, which are less biased, and magazines, but we should all the time bear in mind that this should be definitely very much interesting and relevant, and at the same time neutral to the students. And alternatively, teachers can use one of the suggested IATEFL sites, which sometimes even prepare news articles, which I already shared, and which was proposed by a colleague of mine, Brendan. And following this lesson structure will definitely lead to more effective and challenging classes in legal English. This is my own experience. And final tips and recommendation, I would be all the time recommending my colleagues, and maybe I don't consider myself to be a very much experienced legal English instructor, but still it's very important to plan our legal English classes based on authentic materials, because course books, believe me, they don't kind of consist of too much up-to-date cases, so legal kind of judgments, legal judgments, and believe me, the legal English students, they love kind of recent cases. And it's very important to make our classes engaging and kind of motivating based on real life experience through exposing to the world. And it's very important for us, for instructors, devote time and efforts and select proper authentic materials which respond time relevant issue, and at the same time which brings to the surface the topic which is of which kind of has a kind of high reputation in the legal field. And it's very important for us to kind of regularly get consulted with experienced colleagues, special interest group members. For the ULITA is a very interest group. At the same time, I also get consulted with different law professionals, and this will definitely help us in selecting news articles and at the same time other authentic stuff. And it's very important to keep ourselves regularly updated with recent developments in the field. Yes, what is recent kind of like a judgment, what is most like a buzzword in this field, and we should all the time strive for continuous professional development and at the same time raise media literacy in our legal English classroom and beyond. This is one of my kind of final tips for today, and I would like to thank you once again for your attention, and I would like to offer you some resources. And I once again strongly recommend to use news article in making our legal English class more interactive, more kind of more engaging for students and for us, because I myself learned from my legal English students. That's a kind of my final tip for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for this highly inspirational webinar. Lots of ready-made materials presented at the jet speed. So, you know, it's really nice. I'm really happy that these recordings are available both on Facebook and on YouTube channel of IATEFL Poland, because we will have to analyze this information received from you at a speed in chunks, yes, and
Thank you.
implement it into our lessons, yes, because it's just ready to be used, to be tested with our own students. So highly practical. Thank you very much. The thing that I noticed when you were talking to us is that you really enjoy learning with your students. Yes, learning your
I
students'
do.
reactions, because you teach them, but you learn from them how they react to what you offer to them and what is their vision of the
Yeah.
world around them in terms of legal regulations. So thank you very much. And I would like to remind all of you, all the participants, that the final webinar in this year's series by Tamari has been scheduled for June. We will confirm the date, as I wrote in the chat box, and it will most probably be about business English. So wait for June. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Okay, so right now I am going to stop recording and live streaming.